Hey there, everybody. Jeff Dowling here with Our Curious World, bringing you another story of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. Today, I want to talk to you about a little known historical fact I bet you're not aware of. You've probably heard of the Red Baron, the famous German fighter ace of World War I, but did you know he had a little brother who was also a fighter ace? Let's get into it. Most people are familiar with the name Manfred von Richthofen. Not only was he Germany's top fighter ace by shooting down some 80 aircraft, but he was the overall highest scoring ace of World War I. In fact, the Red Baron, as he was known, is probably one of the most famous names in aviation history, right up there with Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart. So famous is he, in fact, that he was even depicted battling Snoopy, World War I's most famous canine fighter ace, in the Peanuts comic strip for years, though usually with poor results on Snoopy's part. Anyway, did you know that he had a little brother who was also a fighter ace? In fact, he was almost as famous as his older brother at the time, though only those truly well versed in the history of World War I would know that. The man's name was Lothar von Richthofen, and it's time he got his due. Lothar von Richthofen was born in 1894, just 2 years after his more famous brother Manfred. The brothers shared a very similar upbringing, both of them enjoying hunting and practicing marksmanship, and both ended up attending the same military school. In fact, it's thought that because of their expertise as marksmen, it's what made them such effective fighter pilots. In any case, they were also both cavalrymen when World War I broke out, and both saw action on both the eastern and western fronts. Once the war became static, however, this is when neither side is able to advance, horse-borne cavalry was no longer needed, and both men found themselves serving largely as dispatch runners and field telephone operators. Dissatisfied with such ordinary jobs, Manfred applied to serve in the German Air Force in 1915 and was accepted. Brother Lothar did the same a year later, and eventually both brothers ended up serving in the same squadron on the Western Front. Interesting. Since the older brother Manfred got an earlier start, he had more time to score victories, of which he had no fewer than 80 before he was killed by ground fire on the 21st of April, 1918. What's interesting about that, if you're not aware of it, is even though he was badly wounded, he was able to land his plane intact before he succumbed to his injuries, which is a very untypical way for a fighter pilot to die. In any case, brother Lothar took up the slack and flew missions throughout the remainder of the war, with his 40th and last victory coming on the 21st of August, 1918. He was badly wounded the next day by a British pilot flying a Sopwith Camel, and he spent the rest of the war in a hospital. He was still there when the war ended in November 1918, making him among only a handful of top aces who managed to survive the war. While Lothar was not among the top scoring pilots, he tied with 3 other pilots for 18th. His total of 40 victories, about half of what his brother had, was still impressive, especially when you consider that the top scoring American ace, Eddie Rickenbacker, had a total of just 26 victories. His biggest claim to fame is that he credited with shooting down the famous British ace Albert Ball, himself having shot down 44 planes on the 7th of May 1917, though there is some question as to whether Ball was shot down or simply lost control of his aircraft during the dogfight in inclement weather and crashed. We'll never really know. What's somewhat sad is the fact that despite surviving the war, Lothar would still die in an airplane crash. After the war, he worked briefly as a farmer, during which time he married and had 2 children. He missed flying, though, and he soon got a job as a commercial pilot, flying passengers and mail between Berlin and Hamburg, Germany. And that's what he was doing on the 4th of July, 1922, when the biplane he was flying developed engine trouble and crashed near Hamburg, killing Lothar and seriously injuring his 2 passengers. And so ended the life of the Red Baron's little brother, a man who, at least according to some accounts, was actually a more aggressive and possibly even a better fighter pilot than his brother. Had he had the same amount of time in the air as Manfred, he might have been the more famous von Richthofen, though of course now we'll never know. Want a bit of a bonus? Did you know there's actually a 3rd von Richthofen ace in World War I? It turns out that Manfred and Lothar had a cousin named Wolfram, who also flew late in the war and even shot down 8 airplanes himself. What became of him, you asked? Glad you asked. Well, he went on to become a general and later a field marshal in the German Luftwaffe during World War II, where he oversaw air operations throughout the war. He died of a brain tumor July of 1945 while in custody of Allied forces, which finally brought an end to the von Richthofen air aces dynasty once and for all. Hey, if you liked this video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the button below and consider subscribing to see more stories like this from our curious world. And here's your final thought of the day. I admit that I hear voices inside my head, but that's okay because what they say is so darn interesting. Bye for now. I'll see you later.